Well, how's it going out there today, brothers and sisters in college sporting land? That's right. This is JPC with J&J Outlaw Sports, and today, brothers and sisters, class is dismissed, but we are going to have a college football sermon for the congregation of college football out there. As you can tell, I got my amen hat on. College football gods come unto me and said, JPC, we have an epiphany, as you like to say. And that epiphany is, there is a root to all this evil and all this disarray in college football today. There's one big domino that has been the problem for the last 20 to 30 years. And that one big problem is, but before I get to all that, I'd like to ask you guys and gals once again, like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Subscriptions are always most important. That's why I put a lot of emphasis on that word. Keep me up and going, keep me motivated, get me close to that 1,000 subscriber mark. And they let me know that there are more and more of those common Joes and common Sallys in the know, even more so than all those media talking heads. Now, let's get right to it. The big domino that has been the consternation and disarray for college football for the last 20 to 30 years, in my opinion, is those Texas Longhorns. That's right. The Texas Longhorns have long been a team and a university that thinks of itself as above the fray and better than everybody. Which there's nothing wrong with thinking you're better, but you're not always better than everybody. Nobody is. You see, Texas sort of fancies itself as the Stanford/Notre Dame of the Southwest of the part of the United States, and they're not. They're really not. If it was up to Texas, I'll be honest with you, I think Texas would be an independent, but they found out through their failed Longhorn network that they just are not as above the fray and as great as they think they are. That and the fact that they've sort of tanked since 2009. And they're nowhere near able to compete with this independent status of Notre Dame. Notre Dame has a nationwide fan base, and they are supported by the biggest religion in the world, Catholicism, and they'll never be able to touch that. But it all started, in my opinion, back in the early 90s in the Southwest Conference that Texas had dominated for so long until the 70s and 80s when the Arkansas Razorbacks came along and started really competing with Texas and was beating Texas on the regular. So Arkansas starts feeling a little left out, from what I understand. They felt a little left out in some of the Southwest Conference meetings, felt a little ostracized and like their considerations were not taken into account because they were the only team outside the state of Texas that was in that conference. Even Rice was in the Southwest Conference. So as you can imagine, Texas had their thumb on a lot of universities. They've been used to being the team to be kowtowed to for quite some time. Arkansas starts competing, getting more of a voice, and all of a sudden, they start feeling a little ostracized, and Texas does nothing to quell those fires. Arkansas talks about leaving. Texas says, well, we don't want you to leave, wink, wink. But this and this and this, and they say stuff to Arkansas that they know is going to piss them off, and Arkansas ends up leaving and coming to the SEC in the early 90s. Now, fast forward to around the late 90s, the Southwest Conference starts to disband. Texas A&M had even talked to the SEC back then, but back then the governor of Texas, I can't remember her name, she decided, along with some other high-ranking officials in the government of Texas, that if Texas and Texas A&M were going to leave the Southwest, that they had to take Baylor and Texas Tech with them. So that's what happened. The four best teams from the Southwest Conference ended up leaving the rest of them behind, the Rices and the TCUs and the Houstons in the world. They left them behind, SMU, left them behind and conjoined with the Big 8 and formed the Big 12. So Keep in mind that the Big Eight really didn't need the Southwest. I think in a way that Oklahoma's relationship with Texas helped bail the Southwest Conference out. So they join with the Big Eight and become the Big 12, and you already have two workhorse traditional powers in that conference in Oklahoma and Nebraska. Fast forward. Texas decides, you know what, we're going to have our own network. Once again, Don Beebe at the time, who was the conference commissioner of the Big 8, Big 12, Southwest, whatever, he'd always kowtowed to Texas. And when Texas come across with their, and keep in mind that Texas A&M is already a little aggravated with Texas and was thinking about leaving for the SEC back in the 90s. Don Beebe allows Texas to have their own sports network, their own Longhorn network unto themselves. Now help me here, class. The definition, or congregation, the definition of a conference is like, to me, it's like an alliance of teams that want to share revenue. When one of them's not as good one year, the other one picks up the pace and they share revenue, right? But Texas don't get that. They don't understand that's what a conference is. What they want is a bunch of minions and people to follow them around and kowtow to them. Oklahoma, I love Oklahoma and their fans, but Oklahoma should have stood up for Nebraska and Texas A&M and Colorado and Missouri when all that went down. Oklahoma should have stood up and said, hey, look, this ain't happening. Texas, if you don't like it, if you don't like sharing your revenue with everybody, well, you need to get the hell out of the conference and be an independent and try to be an independent like Notre Dame. That's what they needed to do, but that didn't happen. So now, what you had so far is you've had Texas basically, through their own selfishness and wanting to dominate and basically control everybody, they've deep sixed the Southwest Conference, and they deep sixed, fixing to be, the Big 12 Conference, in my opinion. Before long, this could become a serious issue, especially them now they join the SEC. And the SEC, people are like, oh no, Texas ain't going to come in here. Then they're going to, we got too many teams and too many traditions and blah, 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 blah. And that may be right. But I'm telling you, in the back of Texas's mind, they're thinking to themselves, yeah, we'll get in there and we'll act all nice and like act like a team player for the first couple of years. But eventually, they'll come around to us because we're Texas. And we're going to do things our way. And if that happens, it's going to be interesting to see how the SEC reacts. Because, Texas does have big money. But to be their traditions and their powerfulness in football, it just ain't what it used to be. And I don't think it ever will be again, to be honest with you. But that's another topic for another day. So to me, Texas has been the constant problem in all these conferences and all these situations. And if it was me and I was the SEC, what I would have done, and they're not going to do this, and it might not be too late for them to get out of their supposed contract that they're signing with Texas, but they're not going to do it anyway. But if they did, if it was me and I was the commissioner of the SEC, I would have took Oklahoma and maybe someone from the East. You want a footprint in North Carolina? Go out and get a footprint in North Carolina. Go out and get Oklahoma, who has the big traditional name brand, and then go grab either North Carolina or NC State from the state of North Carolina. That's what I would have done. That way, you don't bring in a team that could cause a lot of problems and disarray, and you could get a team out on the East Coast and in a different footprint, along with Oklahoma being a national, traditional, powerful brand in football. You have the best of both worlds, in my opinion. But you guys and gals, tell me what you think. Do you think Texas is to blame for all this? Maybe ESPN, as I mentioned my previous podcast, Texas and ESPN. Do you think Texas and ESPN is the cause for all this disarray? Or do you think that Texas is finally going to come around and do things the way they're supposed to do them. And with that, I'm going to get off of here. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. And as always, KMCA to all the other teams.